I came as a paid musician, a non-Christian. I grew up very distrustful of churches, mostly because I matured in the 80s with Jerry Falwell and the sort of developing fundamentalism. And I thought people who were in going to church were exactly what you read from the Sermon on the Mount. It was inauthentic, they used the words, but that's what I thought. And I also, of course, came to Redeemer with a drug addiction that I hid. And I was very important that people did not understand that little pesky problem I had. Um, I was lured in to this, I connected with this community through stories and mostly organizing stories. That was the real fish hook for me. Was at the time POP and the beginning of MacG, hearing stories about pressures on families, and this whole time there's something happening within me. Number one, I'm bottoming out, and all of a sudden I'm hearing authentic stories from people, and I realized I'm hiding my own story. I'm down in the muck. And also, I want to add that at that time, John Rogers Church, where Allie was struggling. The Redeemer was struggling financially, so there was a lot of chaos at once. There was a lot of chaos in my life. One day, when I didn't have any money owed to me, I just walked into the office, which I had access to, and wrote what I think was a $50 or $75 check to myself. Just that's how down in the muck I was. I don't know if I knew I was going to get caught, or that's where I was. And I was confronted, and I was let go. I was fired. And then a real strange thing happened. I wasn't kicked out. I mean, I started at the same time my own process of recovery. So I was away for quite a few months, maybe 9 months to a year, where I was going to AA and I was recovering my life from the muck. And Terry and quite a few people on this call, always reached out. Hey, how you doing? What are you hearing? What you learning? And I was invited back into the community. I asked for forgiveness on a Sunday, which was pretty hard at the time because I was early in recovery. And early in recovery, it's such a left foot, right foot journey that you don't really see. You want results, but you don't see when or where they're coming. And I'll end this just by saying I was forgiven by the community. I was loved by the community, supported by the community. And then Terry asked me to run Interbeing, which I thought he'd lost his mind. I just, here's a non-Christian, somebody struggling with Christianity. And we started with stories. And we heard spiritual recovery stories, all kinds of recovery stories, and stories and stories and stories. There's one of my favorite sayings, tell me a fact and I'll try to remember it. Tell me what you believe and I'll try to agree with it. But tell me your story and I'll never forget.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So a lot of people who aren't here, a lot of people on this call were really instrumental in me surviving
Mm.
and being a person who, and I'm just so grateful for this community. Always will be.
So I have to say that I just forgot about the process of that, where you were you were an employee of the church. It was just the church at that time, Redeemer, right? You're an employee of the church. You write yourself a check from the church account. You get confronted. You need to repay and, do that. You go into recovery. You're brought back into the community. I mean, you were never kicked out, essentially. You just,
Never kicked out.
right.
Which,
And then,
again, is countercultural. That
right,
that doesn't happen. When
right.
you're fired for doing that at a job, you're gone. Don't ever
Oh,
come.
right. And then you were given a job, a different one,
Yeah.
with even more responsibility. I'm
And
just,
not knowing what I was doing, or
right.
that was a job that was done by the community, and especially taking huge risks, just huge risks. And that was sort of a grandparent, as it were, to Levin, beginnings of Levin.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to keep you on, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would like to invite anybody that was there and participated in that process with Scott in one way or another. What happened to you in that process? What was that like?
I remember that time very well. I was also playing the drums with Scott. And we went to Enter Being every Wednesday night almost when he was the director. And yes, I remember when Scott left the scene, because of his addiction, but I also remember that I had a son who was using the same drug he was, and he was very supportive, but it was always disheartening for me to know that it was a long road for Sam to ever get out of there. And I think he got out briefly, but it didn't last forever. And I'm so glad that Scott has been able to make it all the way so far. And I'm very proud of him. He's a wonderful person. I've known him for a long time.
That connection with Sam would never have been possible if you had kept your addiction silent.
Yeah, I kept my story to myself. Yeah.
You kept your story to yourself. Yeah.
Because our stories intersected as well. There were, those of you who may remember, there were 3 weeks in a row when there were 3 stories told in church. One was when Scott came back, he shared with the community his addiction and his process that he was in recovery. And I don't remember what the sequence was. The second, one of the other stories was my story at that time, because I was, while I was in treatment or just got out of treatment, I'm still in my addiction, but, announced publicly to the community on like the very next Sunday that I was, an alcoholic and going into treatment. And then the following Sunday, there was a third story of the same impact within the community. And, that's one of the things I'll always remember. And all 3 of those stories are people who were not booted out of the community, certainly held accountable, but kept within the community long enough to recover. And to me, that is one of the most profound things in the world, about a community that would do that. And based on story and again, the tremendous love in this community, to to both walk with people in their addiction and through their recovery, and not ostracize them along the way, making recovery possible. But I
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, we the other component for me in my own story was a spiritual recovery. You know, I had lost it. It was there somewhere, but I was distrustful. And in my recovery and acceptance into the community, I was learning again. I was recovering my spiritual self, that 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 invisible thing that always walks beside me, who I don't know, and sometimes I ignore, and sometimes I was recovering.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm, mm, mm.
Um, Confessing is one thing, but the receiving the confession, the listening, and the acceptance and forgiveness, that was mind blowing. Still is to me. Yeah, still is.
Allie, do you want to jump in?
I think also your passion and enthusiasm around hearing people's stories, and like kind of constantly drawing you out of your shell and them out of just that whole coming out of isolation. Like I feel like you just had a lot of love for that. And that was also an inspiring thing for me to stick around.
Yeah. Also, I want to add to this the larger tent of what was MACG was connecting with other institutions.
Yeah.
So once I got out of myself and got into a community, then I'm connecting with Phoenix. I'm connecting with John Schweibert. I'm connecting with all these other participatory institutions, all with their own pressures. And that was very powerful for me. So I wanted to add that, and was a driving force for me.
And Scott, I remember too that you brought to, and I think Terry mentions it in his book, that you brought to his attention and to our attention the book entitled The Spirituality of Imperfection, which became a sort of second Bible to many of us, I think.
Yeah.
I
It's
still have
certainly
my copy somewhere.
Yeah, it certainly is for me. I just reread it for about the 5th time. These are private stories, but in community, when they become public stories, we bond. I don't know how that works. I don't know how, when you get a room full of people on Wednesday night on Alberta Street in Ennerbane talking about what we were talking about, how we bonded. But boy, it happened week after week. We saw it. There was people right out of prison. If it was people, artists, local artists struggling, it was the stories that connected us. And same here with what Daryl and I or John are talking about. Lonnie, these are tough.
Yeah. Right? This is it. This is the real thing. Power in these stories.
Thank you again for inviting me.
Yeah. Thank you.